Hey guys, what's up? It's Timmer with TalkingTech.com, and for the past 2 weeks, I've gotten the chance to play around with the HTC One M8, HTC's 2014 flagship smartphone. And I have a lot of good things to say about this phone, but I also do have some bad things to say about it as well. This phone is well renowned for its design. It's made out of brushed aluminum, and it's arguably one of the nicest phones on the market right now in terms of build quality. It just feels sturdy in the hand, it's nice and solid, it's heavy, it just screams high quality. But one downfall of having a curved brushed metal smartphone is that it can easily just slip out of your hands, and I've noticed that because there's no way to hold on to the phone. It's too thin to hold on to, and the phone is just way too slippery. Like, there's no way, and that is why I've been using a case with the phone. So, although the phone has this nice design, there is a huge problem that I just thought I'd mention, so it's avoidable, but that's there. And now jumping into specs, this phone has a 5-inch 1080p 441 ppi display, but for those of you spec lovers out there, the HTC One M8 is pretty powerful. So for those of you that care, it has a 2.3 GHz quad-core CPU, it's got 2 GB of RAM, and it runs Android 4.4 KitKat with the HTC Sense 6 skin on top of it. I'll talk about that later, but I just thought I'd mention that right now. In terms of hardware, the phone is most certainly renowned for its 2 cameras on the back. It's got one 4 ultra pixel shooter, which is 4 big megapixels. I'll get into that later. That's actually not bad, so don't think that small megapixels means bad camera, because the camera is still pretty decent. I'll get into that later. And the other camera on top is actually utilized for depth information, so you could refocus the shot after you've taken the picture, which is actually a pretty cool feature. I'll show it to you guys later. And yes, that's what the second camera is for, if you guys are wondering. On the front, there's a 5 megapixel front-facing camera, but there's also another thing on the front that the HTC One M8 is renowned for, and it's the boom sound speakers. There are 2 front-facing speakers, and they're the best speakers on a smartphone that I've ever listened to, so I'll show you guys a demo later in the video, but these are incredible speakers. They just produce the best sound and are the most powerful speakers out of any smartphone I've ever tested out, so I'm really excited to talk to you about them. But taking a look at the phone, on the right side we have our volume rocker, which is another huge problem because I hate the placement. It's the worst placement. That's a huge problem with the HTC One M8. My hand is too small to reach it, and I'm just not used to it being there at all. It's not natural whatsoever. I wish they put it on the right side rather than the left. But right above the volume rocker, we have a huge benefit. It's the micro SD card slot up to 128 gigabytes, which is incredible because this phone is 32 gigs, which is more than enough in my opinion. But if you can add 128, you can add tons of movies and you have tons of free space. And I just really love that benefit that HTC put into this smartphone. On the top of the phone, there is the power button, which is yet again another huge problem. I'll mention in a second as to why it is. But you also have your IR blaster for those of you that want to control your TV with your smartphone. But the huge problem with the power button is that, yet again, the phone is way too tall. But HTC did implement a software alternative called Motion Launch, which I'll get into when I'm talking about software. On the left side of the phone, there is a nano SIM card slot. I don't know why they put that there. They could have just put it on the other side and could have resolved all these problems. On the bottom of the phone, there is a 3.5mm headphone jack, and to the left of that, there is a micro USB port for charging and syncing. And now, finally, we're jumping into software. So here's the motion launch feature in action. You can essentially tap the screen twice and it'll wake the phone up. Swipe from the right and it'll take you straight to the home screen. Swipe from the left and it will take you to Blink Feed, which I want to talk about right now. Blink Feed is a feature that comes with HTC Sense, and I found myself using it every single day for 2 weeks. It's essentially your source for any type of news. It's just your hub. It'll send you any kind of news, technology, gaming, world, whatever you want, and it lays it right out into this nice, stylish, simplistic formation. And in the morning, when you're bored, you could just read this while you're eating breakfast, and it just shoots you information of all sorts. It's great because you don't have to go to Google to find it. It's all compiled there for you, and it can even compile Twitter for you, so you don't even have to open the Twitter app or go to twitter.com. It just compiles Twitter. It's then and there, right with your news. It's perfect. Same with Google Plus and any other kind of social network, Instagram and Facebook, and I just found myself using this every single day because it entertains me, so I don't have to just go to Google to search something up. And I definitely think that Blink Feed is an underrated feature. It's actually very, very useful. So, like I mentioned earlier, the HTC One M8 runs a skinned version of Android, but it's very reminiscent of stock Android, which I really do enjoy. I'm in love with stock Android, and being a first-time user of this HTC Sense skin, I've actually not been disappointed with it. It's actually very customizable, more customizable than stock Android, which was a surprise to me, because I really do like customizability, and that's why I put Cyanogen Mod on my Nexus 5 over stock Android. But nevertheless, I'm a huge fan of this because it reminds me of stock Android, and it has that customizability, and it just is feature packed. So for once, I'm pretty much saying that I am pretty fond of a skin over Android. There's really nothing wrong with this at all. I love that it inherits a lot of features from stock Android. I really just like the skin's really clean UI, and for instance here it inherits like the notification drawdown menu from stock Android, and I just really like how it looks. Here's just an example of HTC Sense's customizability that stock Android doesn't have. So for instance, in the drawdown menu, you can put new functions into the drawdown menu. You can't do that on stock Android. That's just an example of how Sense is more customizable than stock KitKat. So overall, this is just a very clean version of Android, and to be honest, I could definitely see this being my daily driver. But if you're someone who's still convinced that they love stock Android, then you could always pick up the Google Play Edition HTC One M8. That's the same price, $700, except for it runs stock Android rather than HTC Sense. If you remember, earlier I mentioned that this phone has some of the best speakers on a smartphone on the market right now, so I want to do just a quick demo of the speaker trying to depict how good they are to you. Hopefully you guys get a better sense of how good these speakers sound, and I can tell you right now that for smartphone speakers, these are phenomenal, and they just produce this stereo type audio because there's a speaker on the left and a speaker on the right, and I'm a huge fan of that. They sound high quality, and without any further ado, here's a test of them. So finally, after so much waiting, let's talk HTC M8 camera. So here's the camera app. It looks pretty simple except for it's packed with really good features. Here are just all these different camera modes, which kind of are redundant. I don't understand why HTC did that. But here's the UI of the camera app. It's pretty simple. You swipe to go to front facing and switch back to rear facing camera. You change modes by just tapping that little square there, and you go straight to video mode or photo mode or selfie mode or wherever you want. But here, as you can see, are all of the controls in the camera app. You have ISO control, which I thought was pretty cool, but if you don't know anything about that, you can just keep it on automatic. It goes all the way up to ISO 1600, which I thought was pretty cool, and all the way down to 200. You also have this exposure compensation knob, which I thought was pretty cool as well, and you have white balance control too. You can keep it on auto, or you could change it to whatever type of environment you're in. You also have all these different filters. I personally don't use filters, but I know a lot of people do, and I think it's pretty cool that they added in all these different kinds of varieties. But moving down the line, you also actually have these different camera shooting modes, which is also something kind of unique. You can shoot in like 60 frames per second, or you could change it to HDR mode, or you can even shoot in slow motion, which I thought was pretty cool as well. And pressing the cog wheel, you have more advanced customizability. You can change your video quality. You can also choose where you want to store the video or photos, and you can choose from SD card or built-in phone storage, which I thought was an awesome feature to add as well, to let the user choose where they want to store the photos. And you can also reprogram what the volume rockers do in the camera app. You can do zoom, or you can get it to take the shutter. But with that aside, I know what you guys have been waiting for me to talk about and test, and I'm pretty sure that's definitely the duo camera. So like I mentioned earlier, there's two cameras. The other one is used for depth information so that you could refocus the shot after you've taken it. But here you can see I just recently took a photo right in my studio. It's a normal photo. When I go and press that photo in the photo album, I can press the edit option and go to effects, and then I have this little button here called U-Focus, and that is what triggers the option to be able to refocus the shot after you've taken it. So I can essentially tap anywhere on the screen and it'll focus at that point, and it'll add this nice bokeh effect to the background. Unfortunately though, I have to say that about like 55% of the time this is a gimmick, but at times you can actually get a nice effect out of the shots. I've noticed that if you have a pretty obvious foreground and a pretty obvious background, it accomplishes a very good effect. So here you can see I just took this photo right in my backyard. I have that obvious foreground and I have that obvious background. In this case scenario, when I tap at the background, it automatically blurs out the foreground and it looks natural. But like I mentioned earlier, there are huge problems if you don't take a good enough photo that satisfies the conditions. So I think that the dual camera actually does have a lot of potential in making very unique shots, but unfortunately sometimes it just tries too hard and the effect doesn't look realistic. But when you do take a good photo and it makes the effect look realistic, the photos turn out really nice, and I could definitely see myself using this in the future. In terms of normal photos, I've got to say that I was actually pretty disappointed. Most of the photos outside in broad daylight, the darks just get destroyed, or it just becomes way too bright of a photo, which is a huge problem. Or when you're taking the photos indoors, the photos just become way too unsaturated, and they just don't turn out bright enough, which is just a huge problem. And the 4 ultra pixel camera really doesn't do any justice at all. I just really wish that HTC improved upon the camera in this new iteration of their phone. In terms of low light performance, the 4 ultra pixel camera actually does pretty good, and I know that bigger megapixels means better low light performance, and the HTC M8 does take pretty good photos in low light. And the 5 megapixel front facing camera, let's talk about that. It actually does do a pretty good job, except for I really couldn't see myself realistically taking a lot of photos with the front-facing camera, except for it's there and it is a pretty good camera for what it is. And finally, let's talk about video recording quality. So yet again, this is the 4 ultra pixel camera doing work, and like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty similar to how the photos are. The darks just get destroyed sometimes, or it just gets too highlighted of a photo. It just becomes too bright, and in addition, a huge problem is that the camera, in terms of video quality, doesn't have optical image stabilization, which just makes the photo really shaky, and that's just a huge problem. But other than that, one huge benefit of the HTC M8 camera is that it can take photos super quickly, and I find that very useful at times. In terms of battery life, that was one huge aspect of the phone that I was very, very impressed with. I could easily get 1 day of charge on this phone with full brightness on, full volume, and playing games, browsing the internet, YouTube, etc., etc. I use this phone for 1 full day, and that's exactly what I got. So I'm very impressed with battery life. But overall, the HTC One M8 is truly a great phone. It has all the characteristics of being the perfect daily driver for me, and I definitely recommend that you guys check this guy out. There are a few drawbacks, like I mentioned earlier, such as the camera, but it does get the job done, and it's a good daily driver camera. But that's pretty much it. I'll keep the cheapest link for the HTC One M8 down below from Amazon, and I really do hope I helped you guys with your buying decision. Also, stay tuned for a lot more HTC One M8 coverage and Galaxy S5 coverage. I'll be comparing the two phones and I'll be reviewing the S5. Anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next video.